It's not the way it used to be.
Amen. All right. If you can have your Bible, turn with me to the book of Revelation, chapter 18. In chapter 18, as we continue on talking about Babylon, known as the Mystery Babylon, in chapter 17, as we dealt with the religious Babylon, but now we're dealing with the world known as commerce. Commerce that has a tendency, another way to say commerce is things, isn't it? The things that consume our lives. I find it so interesting when you look at the Ten Commandments, you don't go very far down the Ten Commandments before he says something that deals with the commerce and everything that we set before God. He says that thou shalt not make what? No other God before me. And later on, he speaks about how he's a jealous God, but we have a tendency to put things before our relationship with God. As I mentioned last week, it's not that God won't allow us to have things, but he wants to make sure our priority is right, that we keep God first in it, that we just simply love him and just be thankful for the things that he gives us and the things that he allows us to do. But the world has been deceived, thinking that these things have something to offer. In verse 1, he says, now after these things I saw another angel. What's these things here we have? Well, of course, that was last week's message in Revelation chapter 7. It says another angel. In chapter 16, we were introduced to these 7 angels. It could be another one of the 7 angels or else a completely different angels. So after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great power, and the earth was litten with his glory. What a spectacular scene, where all of a sudden this angel comes down, and the brightness of this angel was seen all around. And he cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen and become the habitation of devils, and hold every foul spirit in the cage, and every unclean and hateful bird. So what we're being introduced to this, what we see here in the scriptures, is this satanic, this industry or system that will one day be settled in the future city of Babylon. I'll make mention that here later on as we get into it. It really becomes the commercial city. You know, a lot of what we do in our world really does tie down to the economic power and strength of a nation, of an individual, and how they perceive not only what they could do and the power that creates. All of a sudden, there's going to be, I believe, during that first 3.5 years of the book of the tribulation that we see, there's going to be this tremendous wealth, this tremendous power that's going to come where everybody's going to be crying out peace and safety. Everything's going to be okay. Well, we somewhat get a hint of that even in our own country this year, like, oh, wow, we passed a tax reform. There's going to be no more problems for everybody, right? Until I went to the gas pump today and I saw how expensive our gas is getting. But yet, the Antichrist is going to bring this to this world. Now with the city that is Babylon, many people speculate where it's going to be, but a lot of people see, especially when you look at the writings of Daniel, that there's going to be a resurrection of the ancient city of Babylon, where it speaks of Daniel about how the Antichrist is going to not only lure the craftsmen of the world. Can you imagine all of a sudden all the tremendous craftsmen of the world get a call from the Antichrist that says, come, let's build a city? How quickly that could get built, and that will become the central hub, wherever it is, if it's ancient Babylon, like a lot of Bible scholars say, or maybe it's Rome itself, we don't know for sure where it's going to be, where that becomes the economic power of the world. The whole banking system is really being merged into one anyway. It's getting there. The fingers are being put together, but at this time, they're going to have it all, and they'll be able to figure out what all this banking, money, and economic power will bring them. It tells us in verse 3, for all nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication, and the kings of the earth have committed fornication with her, and the merchants of the earth are waxed rich through the abundance of her delicacies. Otherwise, you almost like, oh my goodness, they're going to have the best donuts in town. They're going to have cakes. They're going to have it's almost like a whole banquet hall of us diabetic people. You no longer have diabetes, that gets healed, and you got everything you can't eat. It just goes on and on and on. Otherwise, he's going to provide all those things that we think that we're lacking. That's going to bring us joy. I almost could picture that man. And I love this guy. My wife and I like this movie, If I Was a Rich Man. I even forgot what it was called now. That's the only song that I think it was. Fiddler on the Roof, right? I think a lot of us have sung that song, If I Was a Rich Man. I think during this time, the wealth is going to be so strong that everybody's going to have that sense of awe that of my life, of my bills are gone, everything's taken care of. And then in verse 4, I heard another voice from heaven saying, "Come out of her, my people, that you be not partakers of her sins, that you receive not her plagues." So those living during the tribulation, that you don't fall underneath this deception that money will satisfy them. Remember what Jesus says, speaking about the cost of the discipleship, where he says, what is the profit of man if he gains the whole world and loses his own soul? And so this is the same message. He says, come on out, be separate, be different. Don't buy what they're selling right now, that's what's going to satisfy your life. Because, that old song that the Beatles sang so many years ago, really tells my age that I can remember this right on the spot, right? Where they saying, you can't buy me love. You can't be bought. The love that we're looking for, we're all desiring, comes from the God of love, for us serving and living for him. And I heard the voice, it tells us in verse 4, verse 5, it says, "For her sins had reached unto heaven, and God had remembered her iniquities." What is the iniquities? That they're putting these things above serving him. Make no other gods before me. And the God there that they're making is living for self, for their own things. Isn't that true today of the world that we're living in? How many people are really looking to build bigger barns? They get a bigger house, then they're going to be happy. And then when they get the big house, they say, you know what, we need bigger furniture to put in our bigger house. And then I need toys because now I got a five-car garage in there. And what I'm going to do with my one car, I got to fill it up, right? And you keep going and going and going with your life. And after you build your life, you start looking around and say, what do I actually have? What do I actually have where I don't have love in my life and I don't have the joy of Jesus Christ? Again, if you happen to have that 5-bedroom house, there's nothing wrong with that, right? I mean, that 5-bedroom house for your cars. The problem is when we put that first and we start seeking that rather than seeking Jesus Christ. And he goes on, he says, reward her even, and she rewards you, and double unto her, double according to her works. In the cup which she has filled, fill a double. So really what he's saying is because of how terrible they've been, and they've been taking advantage of everybody, and that's how the wealth so often happens in our world, is that they take advantage of people. He says, he's almost saying here, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. You're to get what you've dealt out. In verse 7, he says, and how much she glorified herself. You see the sin right there? Instead of glorifying God, this period of time, they're going to be saying, look at what we've done. Look at what the Antichrist, the beast, has given us, and they'll give him a name, that's fitting of him at that time. And they'll start glorying in their own ability of what they have provided. It's almost like I was hearing a guy the other day bragging about the stock markets and how smart he was and how much money he's gotten, not realizing that God from heaven is the one who's given him, and he's given him the ability. And I love it where the Bible tells us, if any man glory, what should we do? If any man glory, let him glory in the Lord. If we're going to sing praises, if we're going to say, not unto us, but unto the God who gives us, gives the things and provides life and happiness to us. And he says he glorified himself and lived deliciously, so much torment and sorrow giveth her, for she says in her heart, I sit a queen, and I'm no widow, and she sees no sorrow. Otherwise, she's lying to herself. I don't see sorrow coming. I don't see emptiness in my life. I've been filled with the delicacies of the world, the things that the world has to offer. They will satisfy me. Therefore, verse 8, shall her plague come in one day, and death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burned with fire, for strong is the Lord who judges her. So the mystery Babylon, as we saw in chapter 17, the religious world that really is a self-made religion that think that they could work their way to heaven, they're going to be judged by God. And also the world of the commerce, he says that God's going to judge them. And he says that it's going to happen in one day. So this great city, be it the ancient city Babylon, be it Rome, wherever it's going to be judged in one day, and one day it will be destroyed. Actually, in one day, it tells us in verse 9, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning. I wonder what they're weeping about. I got a sneak feeling, I put on my notes here next to the scriptures, I put dollar amounts. That they're probably weeping that their gravy train is gone, their easy money is gone, and they're weeping for the fact. In verse 10 it says, standing afar off. They're way away from the city, standing afar off, and it says they're weeping for her for fear of her torment, saying, alas, alas, the great city of Babylon, the mighty city, in 1 hour is thy judgment come. It was there. And the next hour, it was gone. Isn't that life so fast like that? We can have it there one day, and the next day, it's gone. You know, I used to, growing up as a kid, I just remember summers felt like 5 years. When I was a kid, I'm like, man, is school ever going to start back again? It would go on and on and on. As I get older, it feels like from Christmas to Christmas is a couple blinks of an eye, and we're there. And so here it is that 1 hour, everything that seemed to be, what they were clinging on to, what they were trusted in, and the world's economy is gone in a blink. Some think that at this time it could be some type of nuclear blast that wipes it out, some heavy radiation that the city is exposed to. That's why everybody's standing so far off. It could be one of those bombs that wipe out the computer systems that they say that they have now where it's dropped upon it, so there's no economical strings through the internet where you could do your deals and all that. But it's gone. In verse 11, and the merchants of the earth shall weep and mourn over her, for no man buyeth her merchandise anymore. The merchants, the way that they could buy, it tells us in verse 12, the merchandise of gold and silver, so the precious stones and the pearls and the fine linen, the purple and the silk of the scarlet and the thyine wood and the manner of vessels of ivory and all manner of vessels, the most precious wood, and of brass and iron and marble, the cinnamon and the odors and the ointments and the frankincense, the wine, the oil, the fine flour, the wheat, the beasts and the sheep, the horses, the chariots, and slaves and souls of men. They're all going to be wiped out. Everything that was centered into this great city that you can imagine, this tremendous city of commerce. You weren't able to buy and sell unless you dealt with this city. It's going to be gone. In verse 14, and the fruits of thy soul lusted after are departed from thee. And here's the right at the heart of what was going wrong here. Why God ended up destroying them. Because they allowed lust to control their life. They were lusted after the things that the city has to offer. I think so often some of our cities, how people lust to be in Hollywood. if I could just get there. If I could get my names in lights and get underneath the cameras, then my life is going to be okay. Or other people lost just if I could just get to Vegas and I pull down that arm a couple times or do whatever, throw some nice dice out, I could be rich, everything's going to be okay. Or if I can make it to New York City or to Paris, and then my life's going to change. And you could see how they were lusting after the things of the world. And the things of the world left them empty. As they were lusting after these things, they couldn't find those things fulfilling their lives. So they lusted and are departed from thee. And as we continue in verse 14, and all things which were dainty and goodly are departed from thee. Oh no, that banquet room is gone. And he says, and thou shalt find them no more at all. And thy merchants of these things which were made rich by her shall stand afar off for the fear of torment and weeping and wailing. And so these kings and these merchants, once again, it's going to be so devastating that nobody's going to want to come close to it. And saying in verse 16, alas, that great city that was clothed in fine linen and purple and scarlet and decked with gold and precious stones and pearls, for in 1 hour so great riches is come to naught. And every shipmaster and all the company in ships and sailors, as many as trade by sea, stood afar off. And so you could see the progression of thought. As word getting out, maybe people that had merchants in the ships or were ready to go dock and pick up their supplies, nobody came close to it. And they cried in verse 18, and when they saw the smoke of her burning, saying, what city is like unto this great city? There's nothing around. And they cast dust on their heads and cried, weeping and wailing, saying, alas, alas, the great city wherein were made rich all that had ships in the sea and by the coastland, for in 1 hour she's made desolate. And so the merchantmen are now weeping. They're all crying because they saw their revenue now is being taken away from them. They didn't have a way to continue in their lifestyles. In heaven, there's a different scene as we shift gears in verse 20. Now we move to heaven. We see everybody there who's been weeping and crying and over that, what has been now taken away, this great city of Babylon. But notice what heaven's attitude is in verse 20. Rejoice over her, thou heaven, and ye holy apostles and prophets, for God has avenged you on her. Judgment is coming to this world. You know, people don't like to hear that. We were doing a TV program the other day and a couple weeks ago, and what's going to be happening to this world in this future. And I was talking with Bill and Chris were on the set with me, and this thought came to me as this guy out there with a long beard and a sandwich board says, the end of the world is coming. Well, you know what? That guy is true that was saying that, because the Bible tells us that judgment's going to be coming, is God's going to avenge her. Again, why is God going to avenge the saints? What has they done wrong? It's a false message that this world is bringing to us. Not only the religious system say that they're going to give you life, and also this ungodly commercial system saying that that's going to satisfy you. That will never be satisfied with man's way. The only thing that satisfies the deep ache within your soul is Jesus Christ. In verse 21, it says, and a mighty angel looked up at the stone like a great millstone. And he cast it into the sea, saying, thus with violence shall thou great city of Babylon be thrown down, and ye shall be found no more at all. If you guys been to Israel, you've probably seen a millstone over there. They still have them out there in the fields, the artifacts where you can look at them and all that. During the time of John when he wrote this, a millstone would be about as tall as this pulpit, probably about as wide as this pulpit, and there's a hole down the middle of it. And, you know, they figured that a millstone could weigh between 12 and 1,500 pounds. You know, once it's this thick, it was used to crush rock. And so here we have this picture of this stone that's going to come. It's going to wipe out this city with one cast. It's going to completely destroy. I find it's interesting. It says that there'll be no more, they won't be found anymore, because really what they did is they deceived. Jesus said if a person deliberately destroys the faith of a little child, it would be better for that person to have a millstone hung around his neck and thrown him into the sea than to destroy the faith of a little child. If you destroy the faith of a brother or sister, kids, he says, the Lord is watching. I sometimes wonder about the teachers across our country who teach their humanistic view. And they tell them that the Bible is just literature, which it is. There's some great literature in the Bible. You think of the book of Proverbs and Psalms and everything else. But it's far more than just Bible as literature, isn't it? The Word of God is powerful, it's alive, it's sharper than any two-edged sword. I think of that angel, that one day God's judgment's going to come upon anybody who deceives, any pastor who deceives, any Bible teacher who deceives. They keep them from the knowledge, the saving knowledge of Jesus Christ. And so ultimately, the judgment's going to come down upon the city, and all heaven's rejoicing. Notice in verse 22, and the voice of the harpers and the musicians and the pipers and the trumpeters shall be heard no more at all in her, and no craftsman whatsoever craft he be shall be found any more in thee, and the sound of the millstone shall be heard no more in thee. And of course, this is all going to be eliminated because the city is wiped out. And the light of a candle shall shine no more at all in thee. And the voice of the bridegroom and the bride shall be heard no more at all in thee. For thy merchants were the great men of the earth. For by thy sorceries were all the nations deceived. Now he's starting to say that there's something behind people lusting, gotta have. There's that drive that's within man. It speaks about the sorcery of the devil. You know, there's a false doctrine that goes out there. Doctrine is simply teaching. Paul says it's the doctrines of demons that go out there. And I think that as we see so often on our TV screens, the commercials that hit us, how they, try to allure us through the ads. Most of that, as you see, if it keeps you from Christ, has its basis right here. The sorceries of the devil, how they seek to deceive us. And in trying to tell us, it says that's what you really need to be happy. And the Bible tells us, I think it's so beautiful where it says, in whatever state that you're in, learn to be content. Learn to be content for the things that God has provided for you and what He's given you. I shouldn't be worried about what zip code I'm living in or where I'm not living in, and I shouldn't be trying to keep up with the Joneses down the street, because who knows, they might be trying to keep up with you, that competition that starts building up. But yet, that's what the world we're living in. For by the sorceries were all the nations deceived, and in her was found the blood of the prophets and the saints, and all that were slain upon the earth. There's an agenda. It's people being killed for their faith. Really, how many good works of God were stopped simply because of money and power, where people actually destroy the work of God in order that they may gain a place of power. And as you look at this, you go, oh, what a sad place to end chapter 18. But let me tell you, we're almost to chapter 19. You know what happens after the judgment of God is done here? We go back to the heavenly scene, that victorious scene, that how we long for that day when Jesus Christ comes back again. And if you have with you, or if you haven't seen it for a while, I'll put it up on the website for us to look at later, is this picture of the prophecy of Daniel. Don't you love that prophecy in chapter 2 where he sees his vision? He's the head of gold, and they show all the kingdoms and power as they go down, all the way down to the toes of iron and clay. But as it finishes up, you know what it tells us there? There's this rock. There's rock that's going to come, and it's going to be thrown down. It's going to hit that rock right at the feet. It's going to destroy. I think right here what we're seeing is that millstone has been thrown down on the powers of this world, and the mystery Babylon's now been destroyed in chapter 17 and chapter 18. The world empire, once again, that coming together of the Roman Greco Empire is now destroyed. As we get into it next week, as we see the victorious millennial years, that 1,000-year reign of Christ. And you know what, folks? You could read that end of the book. It gets pretty exciting. Especially you get into the last chapter. Because the promise is for us, that we will always what? We will always be with the Lord. There's going to be a new heaven and a new earth where righteousness dwells. The schemes of the world will be gone. And I so long for that. I long for that for your life, and I long for that for my life. Why don't we go to the Lord in prayer, Father?
Preacher isn't talking about religion no more. He just wants to praise the Lord. People aren't as stuffy as they were before. They just want to praise the Lord. And it's very plain to see. It's not the way